The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. My name is Carmela Fair, and I am the Instructional Resource Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and I'm responsible for the coordination and facilitation of the North Carolina State textbook adoption process. Thank you all for joining for this meeting with publishers. This is an informational meeting to provide the details and the specifics that are in the 2020 invitation. Before we get started with the meeting, I do want to mention that this webinar will be recorded. It will be available on the website within a bit of time after today, and you will also have access to the PowerPoint slides that I will be using for the presentation. You should currently be able to access the 2020 invitation as well as the agenda for this meeting on the website, but I've also included the agenda as a handout for this meeting. So if you're not able to get it on the website or you have not been there, you are able to access it here in the webinar. Before we begin, let me do a quick check and ask if you are able to raise your hand to let me know that you are able to hear me clearly. Great, okay, so I'm seeing hands pop up. Wonderful, thank you all for that. So I'm going to go ahead and begin for the sake of time. We do have a lot to cover, and we're scheduled to go from 10 until about 11:30, and I want to be sure that we've covered everything. We do have opportunities for you all to submit your questions in written form, which is preferred. I will, however, stop at a certain point or two during the presentation to see if there are any questions or if you do need clarifications. But please note that the responses that I give you today are not the official DPI responses. Those will be the ones that are supplied whenever you submit your written questions. So if you do ask questions today, you need to be sure that you also submit them as written questions so that you can get an official answer and that everybody can benefit from that question as well as the response. So again, responses today are not going to be those official answers, only the ones that will be written. All right, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to look at the process, the adoption process. We're going to talk about the bid submission process and what things are required for you to participate in that if you're interested. And then we'll look at some of the details for evaluation setup, the logistics, and the removal of the materials. And then to round us out, we'll take a look at next steps, and then we'll close out for today. So let's start with the overview of the process. As many of you may know, we start our process off when our State Board of Education approves the invitation. So at their last board meeting, the week of March the 4th and 5th, the State Board approved the invitation, and that information was sent out on the North Carolina Publishers Registry. And so you receive that information if you are a member of that registry. You have to be a member of the North Carolina Registry for me to be able to send you things like the invitation, as well as the communications that go out as far as things that are updated and revised. Those things will also be posted on the web, but publishers on the Publishers Registry get that information through that email. Also, you must be on the Publishers Registry in order to submit a bid. So if you are listening in on this webinar and you are not already on the Publishers Registry, please go to our web page for textbook adoption and find the page for information for publishers. And there's a button to get you to a link to complete information so that you can be added to the Publishers Registry. All right, so the invitation goes out, and a lot of things happen behind the scenes. You all are doing things, we're doing things at DPI, but then we come to a point for evaluation after all those things are done, so that there's a review of the materials for their alignment not only to the state standards, but also to the instructional material criteria that is included in the invitation. Once all of that occurs and the textbook commissioners make their own review, do their own reviews and make their own decisions, recommendations are presented to our State Board of Education. And the benefit of all this is that our schools receive high quality instruction materials at the lowest cost if they order from our adopted list. So this is our high-level overview of our textbook adoption process in North Carolina. Now, when we talk about textbook, a lot of times within some of the areas in our state, there's misunderstanding because of the word textbook. Sometimes people think that that only means print materials, but those of you who have participated before know that it means print as well as digital. So we do have a definition for textbook that's in general statute. And as you can see from the definition, the main thing is that it's materials that are comprehensive, covering the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, those objectives that are outlined in there. And as it says, the format can be print or non-print. And that would definitely include technology-based programs where students may have to use electronic equipment in order to access that information. So we welcome those digital and electronic submissions as a part of your bids if that is what you choose to bid. All right, so your submissions may include both web and subscription-based materials, and we just wanted to emphasize that because we know there are a lot of schools who are trying to use more digital materials, so we want to emphasize that that can be a part of your bid. All right, so now let's talk about why we have a textbook adoption process. So there are many benefits to having a state level textbook adoption process, and we'll start with one of the most important benefits, which is those things that benefit our districts and our schools. First of all, the materials that make it to our adopted list are considered aligned with the standard course of study because of the evaluation and the review that is completed on those materials. Also, a guarantee that those would be suitable for the grade and instructional level because North Carolina teachers become a part of the evaluation and review process. And these are some of the things that they're looking for. And as they're doing their review and the commissioners do their review, then we're making sure, of course, that there's alignment to the standard course of study, is the right for the grade level and right for the instruction that will be provided. We also look at whether or not materials are appropriate for exceptional children and our English language learners. The reason why I put this here is because you'll notice in the invitation, there are criteria sheets for EC and EL in the content areas that are in there. The reason we have those criteria sheets there is because we do invite educators who are exceptional children's educators and well as English language learner educators. And the reason we do that is because the expectation would be that materials that are submitted are appropriate for general students as well as students in these groups. And so we do have educators who are trained in those areas who are a part of the review. And the most great benefit of having this textbook adoption process is that the materials on our adopted list are offered at the lowest cost in the nation. So as you all know, our requirement is that whatever you put on your submissions for adoption would be provided at the lowest price, and that if any point in time during the 5-year contract prices are lowered, that you would also provide that information. So we're offering to our districts and schools the lowest price available on the materials that you have on our list. So the benefits for the publishers would be, of course, a high profile in our state because your titles would be on our State Board of Education approved and adopted list, which is a public list that's on our website so that our schools and districts may purchase from those lists as they deem appropriate. As you all know, North Carolina is a local control state, and so districts and schools are able to have their own adoption process at the local level and make those decisions based on what is appropriate for their students, their classrooms, and in their districts. They're encouraged to purchase from our list. It's widely available. They have access to the criteria sheets and all the information that's in the invitation. And so we make that information available to them publicly and let them know that the process has, it's gone through a process where there's been alignment to review for alignment to state standards and review for alignment to quality criteria. All right, there's also a cost savings to publishers because there's a centralized shipping that goes to our state textbook warehouse. And many of you have participated in the process before, so you know the benefits of that, but that is something that we have as a state. So let's look at who's involved in the state textbook adoption process. Well, the General Assembly, because they allocate the textbook funding, and that's allocated to our districts. The districts are then free to utilize those fundings to be able to purchase these materials, the instructional materials. Our General Assembly also passes laws that govern our process and that actually give our State Board of Education the authority to carry out this process with textbook commissioners and with teachers to come up with an adopted list that would be posted on our webpage. So here's a highlight of some of our public school laws that govern our textbook adoption process. There are actually several of them, but these are the ones that are the most emphasized ones. There's one that defines textbooks, and I've shared that definition with you. And then we also have one that actually directs our state board to have this adoption process, going through selection of books, putting them on the adopted list, but also being sure that they're aligned to the standard course of study. So that is definitely something that we emphasize, is that whatever materials are submitted, they will be reviewed for alignment to the standards. If you've already looked at the criteria sheets, you should have noticed that there's a certain percentage that's given for mathematics. There's a certain percentage that's given for the CTE courses. So the advisors and the commissioners will be checking to see if those standards are aligned, if your materials are aligned to those standards. So they're looking for that percentage that's there or higher. Also, we have a general statute that requires our state board to develop rules and the procedures for the submission of the bids and the contracts. So that is what we'll be talking about today. What are those procedures? What are those guidelines that you need to follow to be able to submit your bids and then follow through, if you're adopted, to complete contracts? So the governor is also involved. The governor would appoint the State Board of Education members, and they also appoint he also appoints the textbook commission members based on the recommendation by our state superintendent. So we'll talk a little bit more about the makeup of our textbook commission in just a moment. Our state superintendent actually makes recommendations of members to the governor's office. And then, of course, it would go through the approval process at the governor's office before people actually become textbook commissioners. Our state superintendent also assigns staff from the agency, DPI, to work with this process and to also work with the textbook commission. So again, that's my role, is working with the adoption process, working with all of you, working with our textbook commissioners, and then also providing what we need to make evaluation week happen. Our State Board of Education is involved because they select and adopt the textbooks as codified in our general statute. So as that process is, we have the textbook commissioners who work with teachers to actually do evaluations and reviews, and then the commissioners file reports and make their recommendations to the state board, and then the state board makes a decision as to whether or not to adopt. Our state board also adopts policies that govern our textbook adoption process. So we have both public school law or general statutes as well as state board policies. So these are the actual numbers of the general statutes and the numbers of the state board policies. This information can also be found on the textbook adoption webpage. If you're interested in looking at each of these thoroughly, you will find information not only about the process, but about the textbook commission, as well as some other features of local adoption processes and things like that. So I would encourage you that if you are not familiar with our general statutes and our state board policies, to familiarize yourself. There's a few that are specific to publishers, and it would be good for you to understand those particular policies and laws. So I do want to talk a bit more about the textbook commission so that you actually have an understanding of the group of people who actually are responsible for the review and recommendation of textbook materials. So their primary responsibility is to evaluate textbooks based on what's in the general statutes as well as the state board policies. The commission typically consists of 23 members, and they are made up of various grade levels and various roles. So we, of course, would have our grades K-5, our grades 6-8, and our grades 9-12. And within each of those grade levels, we have teachers, parents, principals, and then we have one local superintendent on the board, on our commission. Now, our commission members select advisors, and the primary purpose of them selecting advisors is so that these advisors are assisting with the evaluation. So the advisors come to evaluation and they provide information for commissioners who then utilize that information in their decisions. So here are the things that the advisors are responsible for. So they work with the textbook commission during evaluation week. You do know that that's going to vary by adoption. And what that means is last year we had an English language arts adoption. So the educators or the teachers who came to evaluation week were those who were classroom teachers or those who are experts in English language arts. So this year we're having, as you've seen in our invitation, an adoption for high school mathematics and then for CTE courses. So this year, our evaluators or our teachers will be from those two content areas. So typically we have different teachers for each one of our adoptions, which sometimes when we have elementary teachers involved, of course, there may be some teachers that participate multiple years. But in this case, we're working with our CTE and our mathematics for high school. So we're looking at more upper level and secondary grades. So we'll have different teachers. All right, they also work under the direction of the textbook commission members. So the textbook commission members work with the different grade levels, and they work with them through the evaluation, making sure that they can access materials and also understand that what alignments they're looking for as they're reviewing. The teachers that make up our evaluation advisors are typically certified in their area that they're evaluating, and we do have a process of recruitment and selection where we find out and make sure that they're able to review based on the standards and review based on the criteria. We also put out that it's preferred that evaluators are currently teaching in whatever area it is that they're going to review from. Our textbook commission does retain the right, though, that if we have teachers who are able to teach across multiple courses or across multiple grades, they may be reassigned just depending on how much we have as far as materials and how many teachers we have at evaluation week. All right, and of course, also we have the publishers or our companies that provide the bids with the instructional materials or the textbooks. And again, as I mentioned before, it's extremely important if you're not on our NC Publishers Registry, you must make sure that you sign up so that you can participate and submit and have your materials evaluated and possibly adopted. So again, on the web page, there's a page called Information for Publishers. And once you go to that page, there's a button that lets you access a form where you can enter that information. All right, we also have the Digital Teaching and Learning Division, which works as textbook adoption staff and support staff. And again, the main role is the role that I play. I work with the state superintendent's office to make sure that we're implementing the board policies that guide textbook adoption. And I also assist them through the process of selecting members and sending names to the governor's office for the textbook commission members. I also support the textbook commission members as they select advisors and the things that they need to know and understand in order to prepare for evaluation week. I'm responsible for coordinating those things. And then, of course, communication with you through our Publishers Registry. Also, during the bid process, you all will be communicating, if necessary, for any clarifications with someone in our purchasing office, with purchasing office staff. And I also work with them through that process. And then, of course, we collaborate with the textbook warehouse staff. They also often attend this meeting, as well as participating in some of the other things that we have going on throughout the process. So let's look at the process itself and see what it's about. So with our adoption process, here are some important things that happen during that process. First, to get our invitation started, our DPI content consultants create the criteria that will be used for evaluation, and this is relative to whatever content area is under adoption for that year. So this year we had math consultants and CTE consultants who provided the instructional materials criteria review sheets, and they are the ones who are going to be training the teachers and training the commissioners on those particular criteria sheets. Also, DPI as an agency, and that comes up under the work that I do, we draft the invitation and we make sure that it includes all the procedures that you need to know about, the timeline that you need to understand for your submission, as well as other important points through the process, and then, of course, the criteria for selection, which is those criteria sheets. The state board and the legal counsel that supports the state board must approve the invitation, and then only after that is it distributed to you all. So we've actually been through all of these bullets that you see on this slide. All right, so the next things that would be coming up as far as a part of the process is that the commissioners are going to select advisors, and they will have a whole process where they do a recruitment and then they do selection based on certain criteria and making sure that teachers are certified in their area, teaching in their area. So there are a lot of things that they utilize to ensure that they have teachers who are going to provide good assistance in evaluation and review. They also, the textbook commissioners, are responsible for providing a list of recommended materials to the state board. So they have a deliberations meeting, and they would be the textbook commissioners. They have a deliberations meeting, and during that time is when they determine which materials they're going to recommend and if there are any materials that they would not recommend. This goes on a list. That list is a public document. The list is emailed to publishers who have participated in the process. It goes out to publishers within a certain time frame that's outlined on the schedule, and then it becomes a part of board materials, because the state board would then be the ones to make the final decision regarding whether or not they approve this list, and it's approved for adoption and placed on our list. Once that happens, then contracts are completed. So our procurement office would work with you all to be sure that any contracts and other documents like your surety bonds and other things, that those documents are completed and then gotten back into DPI so that we can get things into our system and they can be ready for ordering. Okay, so I've emphasized again that only those publishers who are on our Publishers Registry can participate in our textbook adoption process. So if you're not already signed up, you need to make sure that you do that so that you can be a part of the process. Please just be reminded that you're asked not to make any undue pressure toward any state board member, any textbook commissioner. Once we get the evaluation advisors, toward them and toward any DPI staff. And what we mean by undue pressure is personal contact, where you're trying to advocate for someone to select your materials that you have submitted for adoption. It doesn't include social contact or presentations and written communication, but it would be if it's personal contact for the purpose of influencing selection of your materials. So please avoid undue pressure. All right, our state board members, commission members, advisors, and DPI staff are held to our standards of conduct, which comes through our state board. And so, again, asking for you not to exhibit any undue pressure, because we are all asked to have high standards of conduct, and to avoid anything that could even be perceived as a conflict of interest during our textbook adoption process. So we're also encouraged to avoid any solicitations or accepting anything that would be considered or conceived as a promise or of a favor or any type of a reward. So this is extremely important for the state board, commission members, advisors, as well as the DPI staff. All right, so now we want to get into talking a little bit about the bid submission process. So this will cover things that you all will need to do to actually put your bid together so that you can submit that bid for consideration through our evaluation process. So for a few years now, we have been working through a system where you have to request bid identification numbers to actually place in your bid submission document. So anything that you submit is going to require an identification number. We do not tell you how many things you can submit. We do not tell you how to write your submission. That is totally up to you, all the details of the submission, but we do provide a bid number, and that bid number is required to go on any components that are in a bid submission that are sent as samples and that are put on display during evaluation week. So you can only get this number by sending an email to request the number. We ask that you send a request for the total number of identifications that you need. And that request would go to the email address that you see here on this slide. And we would ask that you would make your subject line request for identification numbers. So the identification numbers that you receive are going to be alphanumeric. So they will have 3 letters that represent the company name, and then a series of numbers based on a series that I will provide for the particular content area. All right, so for example, this year with our high school math, we're going to use the 1100 series of numbers for mathematics bids, and for the CTE, or the Career and Technical Education, we're going to use the 3000 series of numbers. So let's walk through an example of a request for bid numbers. All right, so let's say we have any book publisher, and this publisher decides to participate in our process. They want to submit 6 submissions, and so they send an email to request 6 numbers for their mathematics materials. So as you can see here, DPI would assign these bid numbers, and notice that they are consecutive. So 1100, 1101, 1102, 1103, 1104, 1105. The company's name, any book publisher, has been shortened to be ABP, and then put with the series number for the mathematics materials. So these would be the assigned identification numbers that you would receive back for your request if you were any book publisher requesting 6 identification numbers. Now, suppose any book publisher gets their bid numbers and they decide, well, we want to add 4 more submissions. We have a few more things that we would like to submit in this process. That is perfectly fine. Once you have received your bid numbers, if you are adding more, all you would have to do is add 1 or add increments of 1 to your assigned bid number. So in this example, you can see that the numbers ABP 1100, 1101, 1102, 1103, 1104, and 1105 were the original assigned numbers. So if we take the ABP 1105 and add 1 to that, we get the ABP 1106. And then adding more after that would be ABP 1107, ABP 1108, and ABP 1109. If any book publisher decides that they want to add even more, they would just continue on from this sequence of numbers to continue adding to get more bid numbers. All right, so this is what ABP would have once they add 4 additional numbers for their submissions. So they would have a total of 10 bid numbers. Again, you must make your request for your initial bid numbers to DPI, but if you do decide to add more submissions, you are able to do that based on what I just showed you, adding increments of 1 to get additional numbers. Now, sometimes I get asked, well, what happens if you request bid numbers, like if you ask for 10 and you really only want or need to use 2? That is fine as well. We don't hold you accountable for you requested 10 numbers, you have to use 10 numbers. Your submission is your submission. So if you request 10 numbers and you only need 2, then you would only use 2 of the bid numbers that you received. I've also included an example here for career and technical education. So for this one, this is called Career First Company, and they are requesting 4 identification numbers for CTE materials. Remember earlier, I mentioned that for CTE, we're using the 3000 series of numbers. So in this case, the CFC is their abbreviated name, Career First Company, and then that is put with the numbers 3000, 3001, 3002, and 3003. So this would be the assigned DPI identification numbers. And again, Career First Company could add more bid numbers if they like. If they decide they're only going to submit one thing, then they can just use one of their assigned bid numbers. If they're going to only do 3 things, they can use only 3 of these numbers. The idea is that you want to make your initial request and get those numbers from DPI, and then you do have the flexibility to add more numbers if you choose to do so. So I'm going to pause for just a minute just to see if we possibly have any questions for about the bid numbers, about requesting the bid numbers. And I have Kathleen Linker is with me, and she will be able to see if you put any questions in the questions pane. You may type your questions in. If you would rather raise your hand, then you can raise your hand and we will try to work hard to unmute you. But we're pausing now to see if there are any questions on requesting bid numbers. All right, so I don't see any hands and I don't see any questions. So I'm going to move forward to the next part of the presentation. So we want to talk about the cost proposal spreadsheet and look at an example. So before we actually start going through this, let me just explain. The cost proposal spreadsheet is the document that you will receive. It is an Excel document. You will receive this document with some information and also with a template for the spreadsheet that we would like for you to use to submit your bids. You will also have sheets on there to submit accompanying student materials and enrichment materials as well as a part of the process. When you receive this, and it will be within the next week or 2, when you receive this sheet, we do ask that you put your information in the template that we provide, but that you also not save this as a PDF and send it to DPI as a PDF. We want you to send it to us as an Excel spreadsheet, okay? So again, this spreadsheet will be used for you to enter your bid information as well as your prices. And you'll see in the submission and the bids proposal submission page, the information about how you're going to submit your bid with prices, without prices. It'll give you all the particulars of that. I am asking for you to save the spreadsheet or to name the spreadsheet in a specific way with your company name and then the cost proposal, the word cost proposal, and then 2020. So in this example, any book publisher underscore cost proposal underscore 2020. So that's what we want your file, how we want your file to be named. Now, the submission parameters are outlined in the 2020 invitation. The first appearance of those submissions would be on the beginning pages, beginning on page 1 of your invitation. Pages 1 and 2 contain a lot of detail for submission parameters. So it's extremely important that you review these submission parameters and that anybody at your company who's going to be involved in any way, shape, or form with this textbook adoption process, whether it's the bid submission or the samples or the evaluation, whoever's going to be involved in this is extremely important that they know and understand these parameters and guidelines that are in this invitation. All right? We, again, do not tell you how you have to submit the bid. We provide these as examples of what it could look like. These are just examples. There's nothing written in stone here. You, as publishers, are basically determining what grade level or course you are submitting your materials for. However, you must make sure that that's very clear on the cost proposal form. That is very easy to understand what course, what grade level, however you designate your materials, be it 9th grade or 10th grade or NC Math 1, however you designate that material by course or grade level, that's your decision. So you would put that in your spreadsheet. You must also make sure that in labeling, that you have the right information and that you have the specifics in labeling. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. When you make your submissions, those sheets will be used for evaluation. So however you have your bid put together, whatever comes under a bid number, that is what the commissioners will and the teachers will be looking at to review to meet the standards and to meet the criteria. So if you have one thing and it does not meet the standards, then it will not be evaluated for the criteria, because that's our first measure, is that it meets a certain percent of the standards. So the materials will only be evaluated for whatever grade level or course you specify. And then whatever you have there is what will be evaluated against the standards, alignment, and the criteria. All right, so again, pages 1 and 2 have a lot of these specific submission parameters, but you do need to read the entire invitation for all the guidelines. Now, this is an example of directions that would come with the cost proposal spreadsheet. And it basically tells you at the top how you're going to name the form so that we have your name and that it's a cost proposal for 2020. And then it also indicates information like making sure that you have the 13-digit ISBN. That's extremely important. If you have a component of a bid, so if you have a bid and then you have components that come underneath that bid, you do need to make sure that every item or component in that submission has a 13-digit ISBN. Okay, and this is coming from our textbook warehouse. This is needed, this is required. All right, so even if you're doing this over different time periods, if you're doing a 2-year or a 5-year, you still need to make sure that you have the appropriate 13-digit ISBNs. We also ask that you bold the line with the name of the submission and the bid number, and then anything else that comes within that bid that you listed underneath. And I'm also asked to remind you, do not use dashes when you're entering your ISBN information. All right, so we do have sheets where you have to list your enrichment materials that you may be providing and accompanying student material items that you may be providing. This is where you would list those things on those 2 sheets. There's a separate sheet for each one, so you would list things there. There's specific guidelines in the invitation for those types of materials, should you be submitting any, and then it tells the number that you may submit. Ratios you're able to determine, but we do have submitting up to 7 items that would be enrichment materials for teachers and 4 that would be accompanying student materials. Again, don't use dashes for the ISBN. There will be examples on the cost proposal spreadsheet, and again, I'll remind you, these are only examples. This is nothing in stone. These are just examples just to show how to use the sheet, not so much as these are actual materials and this is what it would look like. What we find is that it looks different for many different publishers. So it depends on you, what you're submitting, and how you choose to submit it. But this example, the main point of this example is just to show you the columns that you will be filling in. You'll have to have that DPI bid number that you request, the title of your materials, the grade level of course title, your ISBN, publisher name, copyright. If it has an edition, we look for NYMAS compliant files, and then we also have columns for the net wholesale, the warehouse allowance, and then the final bid price. So details about that information, about how that would be calculated, are going to be a part of the materials that you receive. But these are just samples. This is not something that anybody is holding you to. This is just to show you filling in the sheet and nothing else. Notice though that the way that this looks, it looks like you have ABP 1100 and that your big bid has about three or four components underneath it. And 3 components underneath it. And so those things would be evaluated, and together they would have to align to the established percentage for the standards, and then they would have to meet the criteria that's outlined for that grade level or for that course. Now, the spreadsheet does not have formulas, so it's not going to self-calculate. So you will be responsible for keying in this information and the calculations. So please be sure to double check and make sure that it's error-free when you submit this for the bid submission. So this is just a sample for the accompanying student materials. Again, I mentioned a maximum of 4 items. This again is just an example. There was an example in the invitation for the cost proposal sheet as well as this. These are only examples. These are not, this is what yours has to look like. These are examples to show you the information that you would need to provide. You need to provide the title, the grade level of course, the ISBN, the ratio, and then of course the price for additional copies. All right, same thing for the enrichment materials. Maximum of 7 items for the enrichment materials. Again, this is just an example to show you what would be required as far as information, the title, grade level of course, ISBN, ratio, and then the price for additional copies. Okay. All right, so those are just some basic slides with the basic example. You will have that sample in the actual cost proposal materials that you receive. You will probably have like an example of math and an example of CTE. Again, just examples. You have to decide how you're going to actually establish your bid. The way that you put the bid information on the spreadsheet, and let me back up to it. The way that you put the information on this spreadsheet is the way that your materials will be evaluated. So this ABP 1100, the commissioners and the teachers would evaluate all of those components, checking for standards alignment to this certain percentage and checking for alignment to the criteria. Same thing about ABP 1101. Everything that's listed there would be used to evaluate against alignment to the standards for the percentage and then also the evaluation criteria. So you do want to make sure that whatever you put here, that you're going to at least be able to make the minimum standard percentage, if not higher. But that needs to be emphasized, that your bid should be something that can pass the alignment review and pass the criteria review. All right, so I'm going to stop for just a minute. That was everything I had on the cost proposal. So let me stop for just a moment and pause and see if there are any questions or any comments on this. So I received a question about the grade level or course column. It says in the grade level or course column, is it acceptable to list a series like grades 6 through 8? What standards would be used to gauge that material? Okay, so again, just a reminder that you have to submit your questions through our written process as outlined in the invitation. So the answer given here today is not an official answer, but it will be a response to this question. Again, it is up to you if you do want to enter a range of grades, and do note that if it's a range of grades, it would have to meet the requirements for all of the grades in that range. So that's the first thing. If it's put as a range for 6 through 8, then the standards for 6th grade, for 7th grade, and 8th grade would be the ones used to gauge that material. So it would be all of those grade levels, 6, 7, and 8. That would mean that the materials would have to meet the percentage for each of those grade levels, each one. It would have to meet the percentage for standards alignments for 6, percentage of standards alignment for 7, and percentage of standards alignment for 8. Okay, so are there any other questions at this point? And also keep in mind, you will have a period of time to submit written questions. And during that time, the written questions will be sent to our procurement specialist and they will be compiled. We will get answers from all the appropriate people at DPI and make sure that all the questions are answered. And then we have a deadline for when we will post those as well. So I do encourage you that if you are asking a question, that you also submit it for the written question period. All right, so the question is there warehousing for digital materials? That one you're going to have to submit as a written question. I want to make sure that we totally understand what you're asking and that for that question. We don't really, our warehouse doesn't really like maintain any materials on site. They basically act as purchasing agents and get material. They order materials based on what the LEAs require or ask for in their purchasing, and then they make sure those materials get to those schools. So as far as the textbook warehouse itself maintaining any type of materials on site, they do not, if that's your question. But again, I would encourage you to submit that question in written form, being sure that you're very clear about what you want to know, especially if that doesn't answer it. All right, so let's move on and talk about sample sites. So as you all know, we do have sample sites where you have to send your materials for review by the textbook commissioners. We also have an official DPI sample site, which is our textbook warehouse. So all of that information is contained in a 2020 invitation. So here, just going over some of the submission parameters that are on pages 1 and 2. It is your responsibility to be sure that your submissions that you're sending out to our sample sites that you would bring to display for evaluation week, that they are completely and correctly identified, meaning that they are labeled. Everything that is a part of a bid should be labeled, and we have the specific instructions of how to label those things. As you know, if you have things that are materials that can be picked up with the hands, different teachers will be using those in their review. So it's important that the materials are easily identifiable so that they can stay and remain on the table when not in use with the appropriate bid submissions. So we ask that you completely and correctly identify everything that's a part of a submission. All right. Also, your sample materials, there's a schedule for when you would be sending those out to the sample sites. We have a range of dates designated. If you have looked at the tentative schedule, you will see that that is in June. And that would mean that your samples aren't supposed to be delivered before June the 1st, but no later than June the 5th. It is your responsibility to make sure that the materials are getting to the commissioners. So you need to be sure that you're sending them in a way that you're guaranteed that they're going to get there. You want to make sure that they get there by June the 5th. Also, again, emphasizing that they have to have the identification number that is provided by me, or if you add increments to add more submissions, those as well. So your submissions have to have those bid numbers, those identification numbers. Now, also on your invitation, you can see that the window opens up for you to request those bid numbers. So you want to make sure that you have the emails in by that deadline to request those bid numbers. Your questions have a deadline of March the 23rd. So you want to make sure that you adhere to that. And then your bid identification numbers, the deadline is March the 27th. So anytime beginning from today through the 27th, you can send the email as designated in the invitation to receive your bid identification numbers. Now, if you are submitting technology-based programs or digital programs or materials or anything else that's non-print, we do ask that you send access information also by mailing it to our sample sites in our official DPI site. We have guidelines on what that needs to entail, what that entails. It's the same information, but it also includes how someone would actually access your materials and how, what the login and username and all of those things. So that information is in the invitation. So you need to make sure that you're providing that. And what some have done in the past is send an envelope with a document that has all of that information on it to make that available to the commissioners. That information should be sent just like any other sample, but it would just be a list of those materials that would be digital or electronic. So that's going to go to all of our sites as well as the textbook warehouse. The identification number has to also be included with that access information for all of the things that you have that are digital or electronic. You would need to also associate the bid ID with that. Again, this information is on pages 1 and 2, and there are also pages that spell out what you need to do when you're preparing to send things to the sample sites. So I want to take a little time on this particular slide because this information is new this year. During the previous adoption, it was recognized and realized that sometimes it's not very easy to navigate through some of the technology-based or non-print materials that are provided. It's not very easy for the teachers, and sometimes it's not very easy for the commissioners. So in order to help with that, although our invitation has asked in the past for information about navigation, sometimes that information has not been received. And so it's not been easy for those who are reviewing to do the navigation. So to try to assist with that issue, what is being asked for this year, again, are the specific instructions on how to navigate the materials, but this is the ask. We're asking that you provide either by video or screencast that's no longer than 10 minutes, or an electronic document that provides the navigation instructions. Of course, a video or screencast is preferred, but you are also able to submit through an electronic document, provide those navigation instructions on an electronic document. So you can do the video, you can do the screencast, and or an electronic document, okay? So we want to make sure that we emphasize that because we do want the evaluators, the teachers, the advisors, as well as the commissioners to be able to navigate, to see your resources and to see all of the things that are there so that they can make sure that they're evaluating and reviewing it properly. Now, how do you get this information to us? We need a link for access to any video or screencast instructions, as well as an electronic document. If you have any of those instructions, they must be submitted to this email address based on the schedule that we have. There are details in the tentative schedule about when this information is due. So you need to make sure that you're looking through the schedule and you're submitting this information along with your information for your bid. You'll actually mail your bid information, but you will email your navigation instructions, whether it be a link for a video or screencast or it's an electronic document. All right. Now, access to these instructions must work through October 30th. So we have to have time to be sure that everybody is getting the opportunity to do their reviews and have access. So we have this deadline in place for now. As you may know, sometimes circumstances beyond our control come up, and sometimes we may have to change some of the dates on our tentative schedule. So if the dates do change and we do have to back up some dates, there may be a change in this date as well for when we have to maintain the access. So that would be communicated out, of course, if that does happen, in the event that it does happen. But I did want to point out that we need access throughout the whole process through taking this to the board. For information that may be for tech support, you need to make sure that that's provided in your bid submission, as well as doing check-in with DPI on site for evaluation. So we're asking specifically for contact information for technical support as well. Now, the navigation information is going to be sent through the email, and then your contact information for technical support will be provided with your submission and then when you check in at the evaluation site. Now, you will also receive a list of those selected sample sites. Those of you who request bid numbers. So if you leave this meeting today and you decide you're not participating and you don't request any bid numbers, you wouldn't receive the additional information because you wouldn't be sending in any samples. But those of you who request identification numbers, you're going to also receive a list of selected sample sites at a later date. Our commissioners are currently working on securing those sites. So as you may know, it might take a while depending on where they're trying to locate. And as soon as we receive that information from the commissioners, which should be shortly, not much longer, then that information will go out to you through an email. It'll go back to those of you who have requested identification numbers so that you can then follow through to send samples to these selected sites. All right, so it is a requirement that you submit these samples to the selected sample sites and to our textbook warehouse. Your submission of these samples to our selected sample sites allows our commissioners to have access to do their reviews. And it's extremely important that they have that type of access because they review everything. Each commissioner reviews everything that comes in from every publisher, while our teachers or advisors review based on their grade level and based on assignment. So they will be reviewing everything. So they will need the time and the access to be able to do a great job. All right, again, the samples should not be delivered before June 1st and no later than June the 5th. So again, talking about our sample sites, there will be at most 23 sites that are selected by commissioners, as well as the official DPI sample site, which is our textbook warehouse. So the most would be 24. That would be the most in terms of the sample sites. So what dictates the number of sample sites? The 23 comes from the fact that the textbook commission is comprised of 23 members. We are currently in the process, there are a few vacancies on the commission, so we're currently in the process of filling those vacancies and working with the state superintendent's office and the governor's office to fill them. So we're hoping that those will be filled soon so that when we do get ready to send the sample site list out to you, all of the information that you need will be there. It'll be the most current and most up-to-date information. So that is why we say 23 sites. And adding on the textbook warehouse, a total of 24. Again, a reminder that samples should not arrive before June the 1st or after June the 5th. Please be sure that you can adhere to this because some of the commissioners will be utilizing school sites or university sites, and some may be using home locations. And so they will provide the specific directions. For example, if their school closes at a certain time, opens and closes at a certain time, they may say, please only send deliveries at this time frame. Or they may say, please send deliveries only on this day, or you need to go to have delivery sent to this specific building. So the document that I send you that will have the selected sites will also have any specific or particular directions for you included. Okay, so let me pause. We've talked about sample sites a bit. I just want to see if anybody has any questions on sample sites. Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on and get to evaluation, setup, logistics, and the removal of materials. All right, so the important tentative dates for evaluation are July 6th and July 11th. July 6th is the day that publishers are asked to set up their displays. And this year, the time has changed slightly. Typically in the past, it's been from 9 to 12, but the commissioners are feeling like that more time is needed so that we can make sure that publishers have everything completely set up by 12 o'clock, because we do have other activities that start in the afternoon. So this year they're asking for the hours of 8 to 12. So that would be the time when publishers would set up and make sure that a member of the committee checks off to make sure that your displays are set up appropriately, or that there's nothing inappropriate on your displays. Also during that time, on July the 6th, after setup, there will be scheduled presentations, which are optional. During the scheduled presentations, what the commissioners prefer during those presentations is if you're highlighting your materials and basically speaking to the navigation of those materials, they really don't want a sales pitch at that particular time. They really want to know about your materials and about how to navigate and find things in your materials. So please keep that in consideration if you are planning to present. An email will go out closer to this time asking if you would like to present. And then once you indicate yes, you would receive your presentation time. Now, also for setting up for evaluation, setting up your displays, you will be assigned a number of tables based on the number of submissions. So we'll take a look at that information when we get it in, and then you would also, in the email that you get about presentations, you would also know what room you'll be in, as well as how many tables you have in that room. And then we typically like to put up table tents so that you know your specific tables when you walk into the room. All right, so on July 11th, that is the last day that we're proposing that it will take for the evaluation. And so, as always, we have the removal of materials and equipment from 2 to 4. Sometimes the evaluation finishes up early, and if you've left contact information, we may reach out to you to say it's finished early. If you want to come back, you can, but we do remain from 2 to 4 because that is the time that we advertise here. The evaluation site has not yet been determined. And I will say we haven't made any determinations. This is in July, so we haven't made any determinations based on our current state of emergency in North Carolina. You will be kept abreast of that if there's an impact on this process on the evaluation week. So I will let you know if anything changes or if we get any definites about that. But right now, the evaluation site has not been selected, and that information will be shared and updated in the documents that are currently out once that has taken place. All right, so I've mentioned submitting questions. Your deadline for submitting questions is by 2 p.m. on March the 23rd. They need to go to our purchasing office, to Mashonda Sutherland, and her email address is here as well as in the invitation. And those questions will be answered and distributed through our Publishers Registry, and we will also post those on our public website. So it'll have the questions as well as the answers. So please try to be as clear as you can in asking any questions that you have. So we do have a new website. The agency moved to a new website not too long ago. And so this is the URL for the actual textbook adoption main page. It's when you go to dpi.nc.gov, if you would select districts and schools and then district operations and then textbook adoption, you'll see that on the nav bar that we have various topics, information from publishers, textbook commission meetings, public school laws and policies or general statutes and policies. So everything textbooks would be found among those pages. All right, so let's talk about your next steps. First, definitely encouraging you to read the entire 2020 invitation. As you can see just from these basic examples, you have your requirements, you have your bid proposal information, and a whole lot more than that is included in the invitation. So you've got to read the guidelines so that you can be in compliance with your samples and with your displays when you come on site, and also with your submission. So it's very important that anybody who is participating in either bid submissions, samples, displays, anything dealing with this process, please share this invitation with them and have them to read through all of these parameters and guidelines. We want to make sure that everybody is informed on the expectations so that when you do show up on site, you're able to just do those things that are outlined and you're able to be in compliance with the rules and regulations and guidelines. All right, so I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the blackout period. We do have two distinct periods that people call a blackout. At no time during our adoption process are you supposed to meet privately with any of our commissioners, commission members, also, with others as outlined in our invitation. And this blackout period goes from the time the invitation is approved, which was last week, on the 5th, through the time that the state board adopts the list of textbooks. So, that is listed in our tentative schedule, that date. We're planning to take this to the state board in October. So it would be from now through October that you should not meet privately with textbook commissioners, DPI staff, or State Board of Education staff. Also, we ask that you don't sample or promote any materials that you're going to submit for consideration for adoption by the Textbook Commission or the State Board. That period is from the date the State Board approves, which was just last week on the 5th, until the day after the evaluation sessions with the teacher. So the teachers are meeting through July the 11th. So the day after that would be the 12th. So no sampling or promoting of anything that you're putting under consideration for adoption. We also ask that if you have specific questions about that, about whatever you may have, or if you have things out there already, we ask that you work with your legal counsel to determine what would be appropriate for this guideline. All right, so when we talk about promotion, that includes displays at conferences, at workshops, seminars, or anything similar to that in our state, in North Carolina, while the materials are being discussed. So the one blackout period for the sampling and the promotion is because we have teachers who will be coming to join the commissioners in their review of those materials. So we don't want them influenced in any way, shape, or form by any presentations or displays at conferences and things like that on materials that are under consideration for adoption. Those materials that you are putting in a bid submission are the ones that we're talking about. All right, your submissions are due by April 13th, 2 p.m. All of the details for that are in your invitation, so you should definitely review that. Again, encouraging you to read the entire 2020 invitation and to be sure that others that are involved with bid submission, samples, displays, any parts of this process, they should also be familiar with these parameters and guidelines that are outlined in our invitation. Again, you can see this is just a snippet of what's in there. We have introduction and requirements. There's that tentative schedule. And then we also have the bid proposal information. All of these are key pieces, but they are not the only pieces. There are a lot of other pages that are just as important within the document. So you do need to take the time to go through that document thoroughly. This is just showcasing that we have a list of the content area courses or grade level courses that are under adoption this year. We can see that we have the NC Math 1, 2, 3, all of that. So it's a listing of those courses. The math courses hyperlink to the standards. So you would click on this page or on one of the other pages prior to this one where you see these course names hyperlinked, and that will take you directly to the state standards for those courses. You also will have the instructional materials review criteria sheets for grades 9 through 12. So this is what the teachers and the commissioners will use to determine what they're going to recommend or possibly not recommend to the state board. Here's where you will find the information about standards alignment, the percentage that is expected, and if it doesn't meet the criteria in part 1, that it will not be reviewed for any more criteria. So the part 1 includes that alignment to the content area standards at a certain percentage, but then it also has some other requirements there as well. So again, encouraging you to take a look at that and make sure that you and anybody else involved in your submission and displays would understand everything in the invitation. I would also say, I've been asked this question in the past, so I'll go ahead and state this, but I would also say we do not ask that you as publishers complete this review criteria sheet and submit it with your submissions. We do not require this. What is required, and you will see this in specific places in the invitation, is that you do have to submit a correlation to the standards. So that would be the piece that's required of you. And you can find out more about that in the invitation, what that entails. We do not have a template for that correlation, but we do expect the correlation to be an honest and complete and thorough correlation. You will also find similar documents for career and technical education, a listing of the content areas, and we do have quite a few. And it's been a while since we've had an adoption for CTE, but you will see on that list all of the program areas and then the specific courses under those program areas that are up for adoption for this cycle. Also, there are various criteria sheets for those courses. And you would be able to see which criteria sheets will be used for which courses. That's designated there as well. And again, the percentage of the alignment to the standards would be in part 1, as well as other criteria. And it has to meet part 1 to actually go through a complete review. And that's because of that critical alignment to the state standards. Okay. All right, so we're going to end a little early here. So in closing, I would definitely say be sure that you go through the invitation, look at all the parameters and guidelines that are provided for your navigation instructions, for your labeling of your materials, for the sample site information, the textbook warehouse sample information. There's information in there about the NIMAS files, and then there's also information in there about evaluation and deliberations. So you need to be sure that anybody that's going to be involved with any part of the process has access to this document and that they read it thoroughly so that the guidelines and parameters can be met upon presenting your samples, as well as at the submissions, the bid submissions, and at evaluation week. All right, so contact information for myself and for Mashonda Sutherland, who is the purchasing agent in our agency. You will note in the invitation, your questions and things are going to be going to Mashonda. There are a couple of things that are detailed in the invitation where you will use the email address associated with me, but it's very detailed and specific in the invitation. So please be sure you're emailing to the right email address, the information that you need to the right email address. All right. So at this time, that's all I have for you today. I hope that you have found this to be very informative and helpful. I hope things are clear for you, but do keep in mind that you do have until the 23rd if you do have any questions. So as I've stated before, I would encourage you to spend some time going through this invitation to see what questions you have, so that it's not after the period and you're seeking clarifications beyond that point. So I would definitely encourage you to be able to get your questions in, to go ahead and look at that document. Let me see if I have any questions before I let you all go. Someone is asking about the invitation and the recording. The invitation, I've already sent that out. I just sent one recently this week because it was updated to show that this meeting would be virtual only. The invitation is always going to be on the textbook adoption webpage, so you can go there to get the invitation at this point. This recording, once it's posted, it will be posted on the meetings page and the publishers page. So you would be able to go there and click on a link for that, as well as the presentation slides that I used today. And whenever the minutes are prepared, there'll also be minutes that go along with that. So all of those materials will be available on the website, specifically on the information for publishers and the meeting page. That's where you will be able to find those things at some point in time after today. Are there any other questions for me before we leave? Okay, I see none. I think I've covered them. I don't see any hands raised. Thank you all so much for your participation. I hope this was helpful. I look forward to receiving your bid submissions, and please be sure if you have questions to get those questions in by the deadline. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great Friday and a great weekend.